Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of four webinars comprising the 12th Annual Retail Forum at Columbia Business School. I'm Richard Jaffe, host and moderator for the first panel discussion. First, please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A section on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Just to give you a quick overview, we've all witnessed retail evolution shifting into high gear. A retail revolution is upon us, and we know at least some of the reasons. Too many stores, inefficient operators, irrelevant and uninspiring brands. In addition, the immediacy and the relevance of the digital realm for promoting trends, building brands, and simplifying shopping has been a force for change. The dramatic increase in store closings, necessitated by the pandemic and aided by Chapter 11, has further sped these changes. Social issues have moved to the forefront for consumers, ethical, social, and governance issues, and more specifically, for retailers, sustainability, ethical sourcing, and inclusivity. These further challenge the retailer to be relevant and in tune with their customers. This leads us back to the important question: what does the consumer want? What does she expect? How will retailers inspire and delight their consumers, satisfying and exceeding their expectations safely, efficiently, and profitably? Today, we'll speak with three individuals who are deeply engaged in what I believe is the future of retail. Nick Brown of Imaginary, Melissa Gonzalez of the Lioness Group, and Matt Scanlon of Nodum, Simply Navy, and Cocoon. So in alphabetical order, Nick, if you could just spend a moment telling us what you're up to, and followed by Melissa and Matt.
Thank you for having me. I'm Nick Brown. I'm one of the two founders of Imaginary Venture Capital. We're an early stage focused venture firm that specializes in founders being disruptive in retail. So that can be consumer products, that can be B2B businesses enabling retailers, it can be marketplaces, it can be anything that falls under that paradigm. Some of the investments that we've backed include Everlane, Reformation, Farfetch, Daily Harvest, Skims, and Glossier. I'm excited to be with all of you.
Melissa?
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Gonzalez. I'm the founder of the Lioness Group. We are experiential retail strategists and pop-up architects. We also officially merged with global architecture firm MG2 in January. So I'm also a principal and shareholder of MG2. And we are a full service partner to our clients. Everything from strategy and design to build out oversight, operational strategy. And right now we're really focused on helping our clients think about how they're going to pivot or evolve for the changing consumer in the brick and mortar world.
And Matt?
I'm Matt Scanlon. I am the CEO of Nodum, a brand I founded about 6 years ago. I'm also the CEO of Something Navy, a brand we launched a few weeks ago, which is exciting, and Cocoon as well. And they all kind of sit underneath a holdco underneath Nodum.
Excellent. So first, if we could spend a minute on the ESG, or the issues facing retailers to be sustainable, to be ethically sourced, to bring inclusivity and diversity to their businesses. These are key issues, and as some people have said, these are table stakes. To be a modern retailer today, you must have these pieces in place, and yet there's some question of the validity of this, or the performative nature versus the reality. Guys, I know you're all very conscious of this, particularly Matt, with a business grounded in sustainability, the Nodum business. Why don't you take the issue and the challenges of being sustainable, ethical, and inclusive, while also being profitable and offering a great value to the consumer?
Yeah, that's always been a challenge, right? The difference between kind of like desire, want, and actual ability. Early on in my process building Nodum, I recognized pretty clearly that sustainability was something pretty difficult to acquire for a business, and that it made more sense to kind of set a definition of what you want, set goals, and then be very transparent about where you are in terms of meeting those goals. I think every business more or less understands sustainability a little bit differently. And as long as they're I think, forthcoming about how they define that to their customer, that it's okay. But I think we spoke about this a little bit, Richard, and I'm a cynic. I've always been very skeptical of sustainability because of, I guess, what we would call greenwashing and the role of marketers in selling a product. I've always found it difficult. Early on developing Notum, I didn't want to tell anybody about the sustainable work we were doing or the nonprofit work we were doing, because I felt like it took away from the legitimacy and the value we were trying to create, right? Like if you go around helping people, you don't do that and say, hey, like, look at me, I'm helping people. Like that's kind of like antithetical to doing something the right way. But that's kind of at the core of how sustainability fits within a business and ultimately profitability. So I think, this desire, this idea that we can all be sustainable. I know you told me I shouldn't say this, but I think it's bullshit. I think it's probably not entirely possible. And I think we need to have a little bit of a recognition that it's something we strive for and we work towards, but to hold businesses to a standard that is actually impossible doesn't really make a ton of sense. And I'm speaking as a founder of a business that is sustainable, but we just define it the way we define it, and we're transparent and honest about where we fall short, either internally as an organization, externally with our partners, or even to the customer. That's how I feel about it.
Thank you. Melissa, from the outside looking in, does the consumer come in expecting sustainability? Is it a necessary promise to make? I mean, we've seen it be a little bit of a catch-22, as Matt pointed out. Everlane being, enormously conscious about this, and yet, has suffered some backlash as a result. Is this a situation where the retailer should keep their head down about sustainability, under promise and over deliver? Is that a better strategy?
I mean, I think it's in anything. It's always a good strategy to under promise and over deliver, keep everybody happy. But I think that it is a catch-22 because I think that people still make decisions with their wallet. And so people will go after things like sustainable product or made in America or all of these things, but price will still matter. And so until the whole ecosystem and supply chain kind of gets to a place where we can deliver sustainability, but it's still accessible pricing, people will prioritize items of a lower cost on a regular basis. They might pick their points where they invest in a sustainable product. So I think that's the ongoing challenge. I think it's exciting that more and more businesses are trying to help that ecosystem come together. But, I think that overall consumers want to buy into companies that stand for something, and sustainability is one of those things. But it's also inclusivity, as you mentioned. It's also, other philanthropic missions. So there's a lot. What we're working with our clients too is, going beyond the product itself when it comes to the built environment. And so how do we also start translating that into design and the materials that are used for the actual store, so companies can take a real holistic promise into what sustainability delivers. But to Matt's point, it's a challenge, and I don't think it's because people don't want to do it, but it's not very accessible to do it.
Nick, obviously you're involved with Everlane, which has had a little bit of a kerfuffle on this subject, but you made a very good point. People come to a brand because of their stance, but they stick with a brand because of product. It's a challenge, I would imagine, to balance that, and wondering what your thought is in general, and then also for Everlane.
Well, I think I think you have to always remember the moment in time in which you're starting your business, right? So I think if we rewind 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, but 5 years is probably the better barometer, sustainability was a very new word, right? And there wasn't terribly much discussion around it. People weren't educated. And so if you made sustainability part of the ethos or core of your brand, you were differentiated because of the fact that other people weren't talking about it. And I think that took a number of brands very, very far. You look at Everlane and you look at Reformation. I think those are two examples of businesses that were early on in this narrative and dialogue, and very much were able to take advantage of that early on from a recognition standpoint. I think today, sort of in line with some of what Matt was describing, I don't know if sustainability is as much of a differentiator to the consumer. I think part of that is because the consumer is in a state of fear. And so when you're worried about, making your rent, you're probably thinking less about other things than you might have otherwise. So I think that that's just changed into a moment of fear. But I also think the rest of the industry has stepped up. And so I think most every brand that we look at, and honestly, if they're not thinking about it, it's probably not a brand that we're interested in pursuing from an investment standpoint. Most brands are thoughtful today around sustainability if they're starting out. It's likely not their core sometimes, but oftentimes it's not their core ethos, but they're thinking about packaging, they're thinking about production, they are trying to do as well as they can, and they're trying to be thoughtful around their own guidelines. So I think you've moved from a place 5 years ago where this was a subject where brands could truly differentiate and truly educate, to a place where an element of sustainability has become table stakes.
That's a well put, table stakes for all retailers. You mentioned the pandemic, the COVID virus, and the concern consumers have for their own health. And that becomes a challenge, obviously, an opportunity for online businesses and a challenge for getting people back into stores. And Alyssa, I know you're eager to be in the retail space and wondering, how are you dealing with the virus, the fear factor, if you will?
Well, I think that there's a balance that everybody's trying to create, a fine line of how do you create an environment that communicates safety first and really prioritizes whatever those protocols need to be, with also layering in brand voice, brand experience, and the humanization of the experience. And so that's a lot what we're kind of working through, is how do you create an environment where people feel safe and confident, but it doesn't feel so clinical that they question whether they need to go back again. I think people are urging to go out, depending where you are in the country, there's different levels of people have either never stopped going out or they're still going out. So we've proven and checked the box. That's human nature. We want to be social. We want to be out and about. And so if you create environments that have those little surprises and delights that still exist, then you're going to kind of satisfy that, because people do have modified expectations right now. So in some sense, the bar is a little lower for you to be able to surprise and delight. But I think a lot of people are prioritizing safety so much, they're forgetting about that layer. So they go into an environment that it feels like flashing red lights of, be careful, don't touch this, don't go here, don't step there. I think we all know we need to keep 6 feet distance. I think, most people are doing masks. So for example, the floor decals don't need to say 6 feet. Maybe they say something that's delighting, like the inside of a Snapple bottle, right? And it's that aha, and then somebody wants to take a shoofy, or, Showfields did this fun installation a couple weeks ago of their sanitation station, and it felt like an art installation, and people wanted to see it because they saw others starting to share it on social. So that behavior still exists. We just have to deliver an environment for them that has that, and a canvas for that. And I think, it's just really connecting that online, offline, everything from that pre-communication that has to happen, so what to expect when you go into a store. It kind of helps diffuse a lot of that tension and anxiety. So when you're entering a space, that there's not that surprise, but then you can layer in, like I said, those other moments. Even if it's curbside, put a little fun note in their package that they don't expect to get, just something that they're going to walk away and feel good. Because that's the side we have to satisfy. You can click to buy on your computer, and that's transactional, and buying's transactional, but shopping's emotional. So we're figuring out, how do we help our clients create that balance?
Yeah, there's no question. We're all looking for a little bit more human contact, a little bit more intimacy, if you will, and then shopping can sometimes provide that. And with the masks on and the distancing, it's become much harder and that much more urgent at the same time.
Yeah, and there's a balance you'll have to get to too. And for us living in the pop-up world, it's like retail innovation in real time. So we're also helping think through how are you repositioning your store layout and format as it needs to flex, as you're seeing more technology integration, as you're seeing consumer behaviors evolve, as you're seeing more adoption of buy online, pickup in store, as you're seeing contactless payments, as you're rethinking what a storefront window really needs to do and how it needs to flex from a point of pickup to a point of storytelling. So there's a lot of elements right now to think through.
A lot of the technology could actually make it safer, less contact and less plexiglass screens and masks. Now, we all agree about the importance of the digital realm and how digital natives are all taking over the world, figuratively. There's a bunch of players out there, legacy retailers that have liquidity hanging in there, have a global or national footprint. Can they ever shift gears sufficiently into the digital realm to be relevant? Can they ever bring their brands into the 21st century and be part of that millennial community that's online and promoting brands and creating buzz around these brands and capitalize on their bricks and mortar and build a digital presence as well? Any hope for the old guys? Matt, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I do have a perspective on that, but also to kind of piggyback on Melissa's perspective, which I think is actually really refreshing and something I certainly should take into account. As we, from the Notum side and the rest of our brands, think about reopening, we're grappling with some pretty interesting challenges. We want to surprise and delight. We want to create a meaningful retail experience. We just don't have enough information right now to, I think, align new cost structures to potential opportunity in store. And so it's really a data gathering exercise in the near future. And as I think about kind of our eventual retail expansion, we're pushing it off because we don't know. We basically gauge all our stores by footsteps, right? You say, okay, if you have 30 people walking by and you expect to convert 5 of those into a customer and they spend $100, that's basically the kind of core of how you plan the financials for eventual 4-wall profitability, but we don't know any of that. And so then we're layering on all the extra procedures of costs associated with keeping people safe. And if you don't seem like you're taking safety seriously enough, then people might have an issue with it. If you're having too much fun with it and you're not taking people's safety into account, they might walk out. And so we're kind of dealing with all these kind of operational nuances of reopening stores. And it's not as simple as just saying, hey, let's open. We still have the same, more or less the same cost structure hanging over our head, but with an unanticipated customer flow. And really, we're unable to determine what our revenues should look like. So it's like either you invest more money in it, hoping you kind of create that experience you're talking about, Melissa, or steady as she goes and try to just gather information long enough to understand what the new retail experience should look like. And it might be long-term and it might be short-term, but I don't think any of us on the call really understand. So just wanted to share my perspective on that because I'm like experiencing it in real time and answering questions that I don't really have answers to, which is, I think, an important perspective for everyone to hear. As it pertains to kind of where I think the big retailers are, we're talking about, are they catching up? Can they catch up to where some of the direct consumer players are? And arguably, I think they already have caught up. And I think technically, from like a technical perspective, they've surpassed where a lot of the startups are in terms of customer service, shipping, web, ERP systems, PLM, like the software backend systems that create efficiencies for online business. A lot of them have surpassed what early startups are able to put together. What they don't have is kind of something that we've been talking a little bit about, in my opinion, is kind of that pure product market fit, right? And product market fit, is probably Nick knows really well, is kind of where customers want their product to be, price-wise, categorically, but it also pertains to brand And sustainability are one of those value systems attached to whether or not a brand is kind of creating product market fit. And I think for a lot of these larger legacy players, their brands are not attached specifically to the value systems of the largest consumer demographic shopping online. And until they're able to navigate towards that solution, I think we'll continually see millennial customers, first and foremost, go to things that look and feel familiar because they share the values and they look and feel the way they want a brand to feel. Having said that, I think a lot of the legacy players technically are already there. And I think the gap between them kind of creating some of those brand circumstances are either as quick as kind of acquisitions or kind of their own development. And so I'm actually very hopeful. I like the legacy players to have a footprint. I'm not one of those people that says like out with the old and in with the new. I think that there's more than enough room, especially in this economy, for everyone to benefit and do well.
Nick, there's clearly a qualitative element that's lacking in these legacy brands, the excitement that an influencer can provide or a social media buzz that could create. And a lot of your brands have accomplished that very successfully, starting from that point and then filling in the technology and then the pop-up shops, et cetera, along the way. And from your perspective, the buzz, the excitement that a lot of your brands have, can a legacy brand ever capture that, or is it never going to appear legit?
I mean, listen, if you can find me an early stage brand that's got better buzz than Nike, I'll give them a check tomorrow. Like, I think the idea that legacy brands don't have buzz is just wrong, right? I mean, you look at, the roster of LVMH brands, you look at Lululemon, you look at Nike, specifically, I think in active and in luxury, you see truly iconic, amazing brands. So I think a lot of it comes down to how many problems do you have? Mm-hmm. I think, product market fit and great product solves a lot of issues. So, if I'm Bernard Arnault, people are going to find my product no matter where I decide to sell it, whether it's, in physical, in a concession in wholesale or online. So they're going to come. And I think similarly, you could put a Nike in that camp, right? People crave that product and they'll go anywhere for it. So they may have distribution issues that they need to evolve, but the backbone of their business is great product that people want no matter what. And people tend to find great product. So I think, the question that I think of is like the brands that don't have product market fit and have distribution challenges, is there a way to save those? Maybe. I mean, I thought, what Gap did around Yeezy was really interesting. I think it's different. I think it's bold. I think it's certainly not without risk, but, it was the kind of shakeup that I would think one would want to see out of a business like that. So I think you can't be scared to be bold, but I do think it's challenging. So I don't know if that totally answered the question. It probably gave more defense to legacy businesses than I should have given. But that's kind of how I think about the world.
It's a little more balanced. Thank you. Obviously, all the digital native businesses are very dependent upon social media. Is there a way to succeed today as a digital native without the expense, the overhead of Facebook? Are they a necessary evil or a wonderful partner, or somewhere in between?
I think it's a traffic question, right? I mean, the beauty of traditional retail was that, and this is, all feels a bit dated in the midst of COVID, but you got a brand into Nordstrom, and Nordstrom had built-in foot traffic, right? So if the product was great, someone was going to see that product on the 6th floor and buy it. Similarly, if you opened a shop on, Mercer Street, there was a certain amount of traffic that would walk in the door. The problem for online businesses is you're building all of that from scratch, and there are certain things that you can do organically, but there's also an expectation for real growth for a lot of these businesses. So I think Facebook, at least from where we sit, continues to be the most efficient early stage mechanism for how to acquire new customers. And maybe that will change. I don't have a crystal ball, but from where we sit, it is a very, very, very powerful acquisition tool. I think the danger is when people over focus on it as a distribution lens or as an acquisition lens. So one of the things we look at a lot when we consider an investment is, what percentage of new customers every month are coming in from, performance channels. And if that's, 20, 30, 40, 50% of customers, if you're spending 20, 30, 40, 50% of your marketing budget as a percentage of revenue on Facebook, that starts to be alarming, because history will tell us, some element of the music will stop. These platforms are not infinitely scalable. They're set up to get you the best possible customer at the very beginning, and then generally the customer gets worse and worse and worse. So I think it's a necessary tool. I don't think of it as a necessary evil, but I think you have to make sure that your business is even-handed in terms of where you're discovering customers. And you have to have, as an entrepreneur, I think you have to give yourself, your team, and your investor peace of mind that if the arbitrage starts to slow, there are other mechanisms for how you grow your business.
Melissa, you're the alternative to Facebook, at least in my mind. Any thoughts on sort of that necessity of Facebook, or bringing influencers off the web into your store, your pop-up, to blend the two and become less reliant on the Facebook traffic? Any thoughts?
Sure. In our world, definitely seeing a lot more people lean in on Instagram, owned by Facebook, but more at the Instagram world. And especially with pop-ups, you're creating those pretty environments. So it's all about the gram. But, people are trying to think more and more, how can they leverage the online, offline, and not think of them so much in silos. So, live streaming, for example, right? That we dipped our toes in that years and years and years ago, but it's definitely coming to the top of the conversation now as an opportunity to increase like the bandwidth and the reach of the store. You bring in influencers, they live stream, they show you how they put on outfits, they show you how they fit. You can identify in the video what size that model or that influencer is. So you could, is she comparable to my body type? And they'll walk you through a whole journey. And that's a great way that you're tying together the brick and mortar life and that reality and in-store shopping with the online channels. So we are seeing more and more creative aspects of it. And it's not, I think it's just really bringing together the conversation so they're not as siloed. And we're thinking more holistically around a customer's journey and how we tie it together as fluidly and seamlessly as possible.
That's great. Thank you. Matt, any thoughts on the Facebook?
Yeah. I mean, I love this topic. It's a big part of, how we think about profitability for our organization, right? Like within your gross margin, you have only so much money to spend on building your business. From my perspective, I think this is something Nick said, there's nothing better than people just wanting the product being good, and people telling other people, I like this product. That's the most efficient marketing tool in the world. So, we look at our marketing activity kind of depending on the business, but kind of on a spectrum where you have to look at it 360. So retail is a component of marketing to a certain extent. However, if you're putting a good product in store at the right price, people are buying it and telling somebody, then you're extending the life of that marketing channel. Facebook is and Instagram are a part of that makeup for sure. I've experienced kind of two different aspects of it, right? So with Nodum, we went through cycles where we spent probably more on Facebook than we had to or needed to, incurring expensive customer acquisition costs as a form of acquiring a large pool of more or less unqualified customers to then build out from. Let's get them good product, let's get them better product, and let's build off of that. But the initial cost is more or less why we started raising some capital. I think alternative option is a business like Something Navy, where she has the velocity of, and the brand has the velocity of launching product and selling almost 100% of it in less than 10 or 20 minutes. And
let me interrupt for 1 second. Could you just take a second and explain the origin of Something Navy? I'm not sure our listener audience is familiar with it.
Yeah, so sorry, I've been living in a little bit of a bubble, I think.
I bet they're aware of it.
Thank you.
Okay,
I hope so. So Something Navy is technically what we would qualify as an influencer brand. It was started by Ariel Charnas about 10 years ago as a blog. She had a very successful partnership with Nordstrom's. And about 2 years ago, Nodam kind of came on as a partner in lieu of that Nordstrom's partnership and started building with her a direct consumer, digitally native e-commerce brand. And we just launched that business. I guess it was little over 3 weeks ago. And it's kind of like a Supreme model where every 2 weeks to a month, we drop certain styles, and there's no marketing cost. So we don't spend a dime on digital marketing. We don't spend money on Instagram or Facebook. Having said that, over the past 10 years, as an influencer, Ariel has created 2 channels on Instagram that have over 1.5 million followers at a very engaged rate. This is the data around her following is like nothing I've really ever seen before in terms of engagement and conversion. And we now have some data on it, which is exciting. Anyways, it's a very different story than Nodam, which grew pretty much as a product brand. We had a commodity, and then we figured out how to sell that commodity. And Facebook and Instagram are 2 channels that produce a very consistent return ratio. So if I put $1 in, I generally know how many dollars I'm going to get out. And you can build a business off of that, and you can lean into it, and you can spend more than you need to, and you can lean away from it. But if you don't have product market fit and you don't fulfill some of the other channels like retail, building brand experiences outside of that singular and very, I think, insulated interaction online, then I don't think you build a brand that's as important to people as you would like. And so I think we're seeing a lot of these direct consumer brands dabble in wholesale and retail and other channels, but it's totally practical and makes sense for, I think, the way people shop. I hate to say this in kind of a public format, but I don't really shop online. I don't really buy clothing online. I'm like one of those picky people that needs to try something on before I buy it. So
we like those people.
Yeah, I mean, you're the majority. 75% of sales are happening in stores. Melissa, we're going to take a couple of quick questions from the audience. One of our listeners asked, who are the winners? Who's providing service excellence in this tough environment? Anybody you'd cite as sort of a poster child for getting it right?
I mean, I think back to your legacy question, a lot of the big guys, the mass retailers are kind of leading in that sense. Part of it's some of them have been essential. They've had to stay open the whole time. They have that infrastructure to absorb that extra cost structure. So they just, that's all it could be. I think, the way in which companies like Target and Walmart and these guys have pivoted and been able to integrate that technology and kind of speed up the integration of it from a 4-year conversation to know we have to do this now, and really implementing curbside and really connecting the online offline channels. I think they've done a great job. I think Nike, which was mentioned earlier too, some of it has their strategic advantages, like they have an active in-app audience. So to create a contactless environment, that's a bit more seamless, was more at their fingertips than it is for others. Home Depot, I think they've done a great job. I think also it's not just them doing a great job for consumers, but also prioritizing the safety of their employees. And I think that goes a long way as well. And I think consumers want to support brands that are making those priorities.
I agree. I think some of those essential retailers have done a very good job of making it a friendly place to shop. So we've talked about how the industry has suffered tremendously, contracted. But my view, and I'm an optimist, is that there's tremendous opportunity as these big box legacy retailers fail and donate market share. It's up for grabs, and it seems like you guys focusing on digital natives, on millennial and Gen Z focused businesses with tremendous brand identity, or the ability for the younger generations to identify with the brands, you're in the right place at the right time. Is this a time of unprecedented opportunity in retail, or is it just me being overly optimistic? Nick, you want to start with that?
For sure. I mean, I think that, forgetting just retail, I think just like taking a step back and thinking about entrepreneurship in general. I think, great businesses tend to stem out of challenge. I read a piece recently that said that Carvel and Ferrari both came out of the Great Depression, and obviously two businesses that are connected to sort of either luxury or gluttony in some way, or indulgence, maybe a better word than gluttony. And then you sort of fast forward to 10 years ago with the innovation that we saw in 2008, 2009 with Airbnb and Uber and the sort of shared economy. So I think that whenever there's unrest and challenge, I think you see great ideas, and I think we'll see that in retail. I think we'll see that across lots of different categories. I also think they're, part of an early stage investor's job is to be really thoughtful around picking people, right? Because in the end, these are all, there's so many great ideas, but without wonderful execution, it's hard to turn it into much of anything. And I do think that in moments like this, you separate out the determination of founders a little bit. I think over the last 10 years, it became slightly easier to be an entrepreneur. There was an abundance of capital. It was super popular. It felt easy. If you look at, sort of universities and, people's inclination to kind of take early stage risk, it was very high. And I think, taking a step back today where people feel a little bit more vulnerable, they're a little bit more scared, they're probably a little bit more risk averse. I think those tendencies probably give me more confidence that an entrepreneur raising money for the first time today is raising money for the right reasons and has really strong conviction around her or his idea.
Matt, I know the answer you're going to provide, that yes, it's a great time to be an entrepreneur, and my optimism is absolutely justified. So anticipating that, can you take it a step further and talk through sort of the growth trajectory for any of your businesses or a model business going from perhaps digital native, and how you build out the store opportunities? If 75% of revenues are in stores, how do you take advantage of that? Or maybe you don't.
Yeah. Of course, I'm very optimistic, but it's still kind of fraught with challenge and ambiguity. And, throughout everything that COVID has done to the businesses that I work in, one of the things that we've learned to adapt to is this element of like, and I hate the word, and I think no one has said it so far, but like unprecedented circumstances taking place and really not having a plan B for that kind of stuff. We were talking today, like, do we need a plan B for the fall? It's a big season for us. And I was like, well, I don't even know where to start with a plan B. Like, I don't know what we could possibly put in place. So we're kind of forced to be optimistic and then kind of deal with consequences of things that we can't predict and can't control. So optimism, but I think it's like healthy optimism, because I still don't sleep very well at night. Having said that, as we think about the opportunity for retail, or kind of the growth trajectory for brands in apparel long term, I think the same doors are going to open up. And I mean that figuratively, and I guess literally, that retail footprints are going to develop, but I don't think that we've kind of seen where the opportunity is going to come from. In a lot of cases, our retail is still subjected to the cost structures that I mentioned before, which have basically remained unchanged pre-COVID. And that doesn't make sense for kind of the ramp up back to either how people are going to shop or how they used to shop. And so until there's like a level set of what retail actually looks like the how much you pay for rent, it's difficult to know how quickly we're going to be able to lean into it. I can say, without a doubt, that retail will exist in the same general abundance that it has because people shop it. I think, of course, there will be larger and better e-commerce options and, other kind of in-between versions, but the world in which no one goes to a store and wants to try on a dress or a shirt is, I think, given what the technology is that would enable some sort of different behavior, virtually impossible. I think we should expect brands that kind of get through this should be stronger and have the ability to lean in more thoroughly to a set of circumstances that look like something that I can't predict right now.
Melissa, if you were to advise one of Matt's companies about retail expansion, from a good idea to a blog to, the first sale online, how would you visualize it rolling out? And would you go back into places like malls and street locations? Remember Soho, remember Rodeo Drive? Are there places you'd want to put stores, assuming the economics work?
Richard, is this free advice though? I just want to make sure.
I'm also no pressure here. I mean, advice to a live audience. Yeah, look, I mean, I'm it's like the biggest reason why I would say you would turn to pop-ups first, because of all those risks. And so you're not tying yourself in. And we're definitely in a world where, I mean, if real estate leasing teams are on this, they won't want me to say it, but as brands, you have so much negotiating power right now. Right. So I think you can get really creative about what your lease looks like, especially if you're testing the viability of a longer term lease. They want to get you in the door. But I think with pop-up, consumers are just more open-minded to not expecting perfection, and I think you could be really targeted on how you curate, definitely integrating more of that online, offline strategy. To your point, it's all about fit, and obviously men and women shop differently. So as a man, we've seen a lot of success in menswear brands that come in and they do, very limited inventory in the store because it's all about fit. And then, I think drop ship is going to be even more accepted than ever because we're living in the world that we're living in today. And I think people are adapting to that more and more where, they have that fluid interaction of buy online, pick up in store, buy online, ship to store, return, like that whole mindset is shifted. So you can really rethink how you approach your merchandising and your inventory risk in store in a different way than you have in the past.
The economics a lot. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you can play with that model. And then I think there's a lot of opportunity for strategic partnerships. So you're not taking on full stores. I think that there's a lot of really great retailers like a Nordstrom who is rethinking, okay, what do our partnerships in this store look like? And they're rethinking the entrances and exits so that, a brand like yours can come into the environment without having to go through the whole mall. Maybe they're giving you a spot by a main entrance, that street level. I definitely would lean towards outdoor malls over indoor malls for the future. I think we already saw that trend, and they just create more lifestyle environments, and there's a lot you can leverage off of that. I think mobile, if you have the money to invest in that infrastructure, is also a great bet because it allows you to show up where you need to for how long you need to. So I think that there's a lot, I think a lot more people are taking a different approach when they think of physical. And you make your bets in the main cities, where you're going to have a year-round flagship. But outside of that, it's a more short-term, strategic. When do I need to be in these places and why kind of model? And even the bigger brands are doing that, who are trying to rein in their capital expenditures and saying, let's put our money into the properties that make the most sense year-round, and the rest of our strategies, let's show up when we need to. And whether it's a product launch, a new partnership that we're testing out, seasonality that makes sense, for cashmere, you don't need to be, in hot environments at all times of the year. So, I would take that approach and be really strategic about it. And I do think that you could get a lot of benefits on the rent side. I just think brands and retailers have so much power right now.
So just a quick consensus, a show of hands. Malls will exist in 5 years? Yes or no? Yes?
I think good ones will.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good ones.
Out in the audience that will mall retailing be relevant? And I think the answer is yes. It's just going to be very selectively. There'll be good malls.
I mean, in a funny way, I think there are certain malls that are actually in a better spot than major cities. I mean, I think if you think about like, one of the challenges that a lot of companies we see are having with physical retail is that the roadmap traditionally has been open in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco as your starting locations. Those three cities are obviously the most hit, right? And they're hit in part because tourism was a huge part of those businesses. It's completely dried up, but it's also been hit because a lot of the affluent customers there have flocked away from those cities. So you've got a real traffic issue. I think if you think about more destination oriented malls, maybe in certain suburbs, like, the Short Hills Mall comes to mind, like that's a hyper affluent customer. It's not necessarily a location that's traditionally been built around tourism. And it's probably a customer that is quarantining or isolating at their home in that location rather than in a city. Right. I think that will come back faster, probably has already come back faster than Madison Avenue will.
Sure. And unfortunately for us city dwellers, that's going to be a reality. A couple of specific questions out here. Matt, do you share resources, logistics, marketing, production among your three brands and share best practices? And go ahead.
Yeah, so all brands sit on a centralized back-end system, from software, ERP, PLM, through to customer service solutions, back-end financial operations, supply chain, throughout the world. That's kind of, you look at where value's been created in this category, and it's generally when those expensive systems are conglomeratized and then centralized and spit out. Whether it's LVMH, G3, Tapestry, et cetera, very, very common. And I never saw it happening in the direct consumer space where there was a specific understanding of how supply chain and fulfillment systems matched up against the e-commerce systems. Yes, of course, there is this back-end piece. And then we try and let each brand service creative, both from like a product through to kind of art direction separately. That's where they never cross over. I will add, however, that it's a work in progress. We're learning stuff every day. We're learning how to improve it and make it better, but we never pretend like we have all the answers. We recognize it takes time to figure it out.
There's been a lot of interest in different merchandise categories, obviously apparel being less important and home office being more important. Nick, you want to talk about where you see the opportunities in categories away from apparel, perhaps, and how you're placing your bet, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this is probably more simple than people think. I think, the stuff that I see working in apparel right now is very comfort-led, which is unsurprising. I see tops perform better than bottoms because all of us are wearing a top right now on Zoom. And, I think people they may not be dressing up for Zoom, but that's part of their kind of day-to-day encounter. So I think the sort of rubric of where we're focused has changed a little bit. I think self-care has obviously had a huge boost. So shampoo, body, we're investors in a body care brand called Necessera that's performed super well through all of this. Anything that's at home. So, nails, hair dye have obviously seen really strong increases. Skincare. I think color cosmetics a little bit more challenging. Obviously, people are going out less, so I think that's been a little bit of a struggle for some, although not for all. And then, I think which is probably less relevant for this call, but I think there continues to be a massive opportunity around telehealth and telemedicine, and we're kind of navigating that very opportunistically. I think it's becoming much more crowded in terms of capital, but I think you'd have to be living under a rock not to believe that the way in which we sort of get health, get advice, and sort of lean into medicine won't be something that's done more remotely in the future.
I agree. Melissa, there was an interesting question. we've talked about getting that emotional impact of a store and trying to continue that in a tough environment. Is there any way to shift that emotional content to an online experience, whether it's a human touch, the chat room, video, anything that any of you guys have experienced that makes the online shopping experience more potent, more full of emotional content? And any thoughts here?
For sure. I mean, I think you're seeing that a lot. The thing is, it's like, even though we're maybe interacting less, the average amount of time somebody's interacting with a salesperson online is much longer. So I think there's actually a much larger opportunity to create that. You're seeing it a lot with virtual appointments, especially in beauty and in fashion. You know, I could say I'm an example of it because I did it. I checked it out with the Chanel Atelier, which I've been to their Soho location many times. I mean, you know, for when they first came out, they were on a lot of mood boards for brands that wanted to create that store environment. But I really shopped. I went in all the time because I was inspired by the built environment. And then I did a virtual appointment with one of their makeup artists, and I bought like 6 products. You know, there was so much intimacy in that conversation. That person went through my drawer with me. What did I own? You know, what colors do I like? What gaps did I have in my at-home inventory? How did that could get filled in? And so it felt like I was getting very personalized service. Plus, the brand learned a ton about me because they created an online account. You know, they knew where I shopped. They'll know what recommendations to make in the future. I think, you know, you're seeing a lot of engagement happen when it's Insta Live. But a lot deeper when it's that one-on-one. So if you're repurposing your store staff, you know, that worked at your brick and mortar store, your pop-up store, I mean, they know the FAQs more than anybody because they've been at the front lines and they know what questions were being asked. They know why something brought to a dressing room but wasn't purchased. And so they're really well equipped to be able to service a customer in that online way. And a lot of clients that we've seen, Purple Mattress being an example, you know, when they closed their stores earlier this year because of the pandemic and they repurposed a lot of that staff to their call centers, they had really high performance because they really knew how to service the customer.
Sure. Matt, Nick, are you guys using that in some of your stores, these where you have a closed store and a staff that might have been furloughed? Are you putting them online or you know, in a chat room to help customers to schedule appointments for sale? Any of that been something you've been able to employ?
So it's not something that we've done yet, and I'll explain why. I mean, the systems goes back kind of the difference between big brands and startup businesses is the costs of training and the maintenance of the technology to enable that without really understanding the user behavior is difficult to assess. And so, you know, and it would be incremental, I think, in the short term relative to where the big pockets of opportunity exist online and in store. You know, the biggest data point in terms of behavior online that I think translates to how people want to shop in store during all the COVID is almost across the board for all our businesses. Average order values have increased. Having said that, return rates have also increased incrementally. That just means that people are buying more at once and returning more, doing more of like an at-home try-on, which is not a novel behavior. People have been doing that regardless, but we've seen it tick up. So I think for somebody who wasn't really acting like that, now they're starting to act like that, which in itself isn't a great behavior to get adopted into larger e-commerce experiences because it's generally a much less profitable, makes the business less profitable. But for me, that's indicative of, I think, where people are translating their desire to shop in store to online.
And I would agree with that. We haven't seen a ton of it. We've seen a little bit of it on retail to customer care on an individual basis, but also, you know, we've got a decent amount of retail exposure in the fund, physical retail exposure, but we don't have a ton of it. So, you know, we would probably not be the best people to use as a benchmark. I think what would be almost more interesting is the companies that have fleets of 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 doors that are closed. What are they doing with that infrastructure of people?
Yeah, absolutely. A question outside all of our comfort zones, discretionary spending in the next 12 months. We're obviously in very stretched economic times. don't know when the economy comes back. Do you think the discretionary spending will improve with pent-up demand as stores open, decline as unemployment income goes away, stay the same? 12-month outlook. Melissa, you want to go first?
Give me the hard one. I don't know. When the checks first came out, you heard so many retailers see those dollars get put to work right away.
Right.
And it was interesting to see people will still prioritize, like people that, they prioritize having the freshest sneakers, they might still do that or whatever. I do think the longer it lasts, of course, the tougher it's going to be. Right. And without getting that extra $600 stimulus, that makes a big difference into your discretionary income. On the flip side, there's definitely a lot of people who are working down their credit card debt. And because you're going out less, you're not going to hotels, you're not taking trips on planes, you're not going to restaurants all the time. Most people's average credit card bill is actually lower, and some people feel like they're actually saving. So I think you'll get little spikes of that pent-up demand that comes out. You'll probably see it, in November had a holiday. But yeah, but I don't know that we can see that spent on a consistent basis until the economy gets better.
Okay, Nick, any hope for the economy or for the consumer spending?
I mean, I think the unemployment number is really alarming. And I think anybody that doesn't think at some point that's going to create an even bigger problem is, again, probably living under a bit of a rock. I do think that there will be revenge shopping when stuff comes back. I do think that, to Melissa's point, there are certain categories that are out in terms of spending, and that just takes the same or a slightly smaller amount of cash and moves it towards a more consolidated grouping of things. So I think that will play in. But I think, all of us should be up at night, to Matt's point, given the uncertainty of what's happening in the world. And it's hard to put a silver lining on that piece.
I unfortunately agree. Matt?
Yeah. I mean, I think about this every day. I think the net through the end of 2020 will be the same as expected. I think consumer spending will just be shifted into different pockets, either parents spending more, buying for their adult children who are maybe out of work or were furloughed or making a little bit less. I think we'll see circumstances like that. So increased gifting. Net, I think consumer spending stays about where we expect it to be through the end of the year. Long term, I have no idea. I mean, like Nick said, the unemployment is very scary. The national debt is even scarier. We have an election coming up. I mean, I could spend another hour talking about the things that do keep me up at night, but I'll kind of leave it. I'll leave it there to save everybody's anxiety levels right now.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Melissa. It's been terrific. Appreciate all of your help. I'd like to thank the Deming Center at Columbia University and Columbia Business School for their support, Intel, and the Robin Report, our sponsors for this. And thank you to all our listeners and our great questions. There's a question for Nick Brown. How do they get you a deck?
You can email me always. My email's on my Instagram. It's on my LinkedIn, nick@imaginary.co.
Okay.
That was an easy one.
Nice.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much.